It's now official. Several states in India are facing a drought. Hello and welcome to We Mean Business. The question we're asking on the show today, is India prepared to deal with a drought and how badly will it impact growth? Let me introduce our special guest on the show today. We've got Dr. K Alagh, Chairman of the Institute of Rural Management, Anand, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Care Ratings, joining us from Mumbai. Also, Mr. Surinder Sud, Consulting Editor of Business Standard. With me here in the Delhi studio, Ranjan, Senior Manager, Policy of ActionAid. Mahesh, Palawat, Chief Meteorologist of Skymet. Also with me here in the Delhi studio, Prof V S Vyas, Member Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and Deputy Chairperson of the State Planning Board of Rajasthan, joins us from Jaipur. And Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Care Ratings. Thanks so much, all of you, for being with us here on the show. Before we move forward and discuss how badly will India be impacted by the drought this year, let's first take a look at some of the impact that we're going to see on inflation and growth.
Parched fields and worried farmers, but the skies have refused to relent, with a long period average for rain expected to be less than 90%. The Planning Commission has estimated that growth will be cut by 50% to 6% for the current fiscal and emergency measures being put in place.
सूखे के संकट में जो लोग आए हैं और जिनकी खेत पर कोई बुआई हुई नहीं, उनको रोजी देने के लिए एम्प्लॉयमेंट देने की जो बात है, इसमें आज के जो रूल्स रेगुलेशन है, इसमें कोई रिलैक्सेशन देने की आवश्यकता है। इस तरह की डिमांड राज्य सरकार ने की और ये तीनों सब्जेक्ट में राज्य सरकार की जो अपेक्षा थी, जो डिमांड थी, वो पूरी करने की बात हम लोगों ने की है।
Karnataka, Gujarat and Maharashtra are the worst hit states after the weak monsoon. India's last drought year in 2009 saw rain that was 23% below normal. It drove food prices that in turn sent headline inflation into double digits and triggered a series of 13 interest rate increases between March 2010 and October 2011. Yes Bank has estimated that 10% shortfall in monsoon could push up inflation by 40 basis points. Nomura expects the government's fiscal deficit target to spill to 5.8% from the target 5.1%. The impact of the weak monsoon on companies is clear. Mahindra & Mahindra has cut tractor sales growth for the year between 5 and 6% from 10 to 12% earlier. NDTV Bureau Report.
All right, but the new Finance Minister P. Chidambaram has already pressed into action a number of steps. Let's listen into what he had to say about how the government intends to deal with the drought.
Unfortunately, the southwest monsoon has been below expectations. Drought-like conditions have been reported from several states. It is a duty of the government to provide relief to the people living in drought-affected districts, protect wage employment, and save agricultural production to the extent possible. MG Narega and other schemes will be converged to meet the challenge of drought. Contingency plans are in place to supply drinking water and fodder and to help farmers replant alternative crops. We must seize the opportunity to build durable assets that will provide employment to the poor as well as help in drought-proofing agriculture in the affected districts.
Dr. K Alagh, let me start by asking you, how badly do you think the drought will impact India? It really couldn't have come at a worse time when we're already battling a slowdown. The government is trying to really revive the economy, and now we're faced with a drought-like situation that will clearly shave off more percentage points from an already very, very bad growth number that we're looking at for this year.
I don't think that the growth question is the most serious one, because Kharif itself is a little less than half of total output, and even if the growth rate is not there, maybe there will be a very small decrease in agricultural production. We don't know what Rabi is going to be like, and I don't think that will affect, really the growth rate will be affected more by what Mr. Chidambaram does in the non-agricultural sector. But I think the question of prices, particularly of volatile food prices, pulses, edible oils, milk products. These are all the kind of products where the inflation is can be 10% plus, and they will probably get affected in a fairly serious manner in this Kharif until the Rabi comes in. Although, mind you, the points that the FM made, which is something that we have learned from the mid-80s drought of the last century, that if you release grains, that by itself has a deflationary effect on the economy. So a lot depends on how you manage the economy. I think it's important to release grains, rice and wheat particularly. It's important to manage the import part because it's the inflation which worries you. There are also the welfare effects, which is the employment question and the drinking water question. And fodder means less income. Fodder scarcity means less income for very poor farmers. But those are welfare effects. I think your question on the macro effects, I still think that the bigger issues lie in the macro reform that we are talking about, and India has learned to face droughts. We have had good growth rates in years when we have had droughts during the last 15 years or so.
All right, but the situation clearly, Dr. Alagh, this time around is different primarily because we're already in a phase of a slowdown, a sharp slowdown that we're seeing. And today, for instance, CRISIL has mentioned that we may actually slip down to a figure of 5.5% growth this year, primarily because of the deficient monsoon. And yes, I'd like to take forward some of those very, very important points that you've raised. The fact that, that inflation will be a key concern because we're going to see food prices spiral, the fact that there are clear welfare issues at hand, both in terms of employment, in terms of drinking water. So let's take forward our discussion with each of these issues. First, to talk about inflation. Dr. Vyas, how badly do you think a deficient monsoon is going to impact food prices? Because inflation going out of hand is perhaps the worst thing for the government at this point, when it's already battling very, very sticky inflation, where you're already seeing interest rates being very high because the Reserve Bank of India is worried about inflation. Do we see food prices really going out of hand because of the deficient monsoon?
Well, first we should realize that this is not unexpected, that we had 2 good years and we do not have a series of 3 good years in many such instances. So it is not that it is, we are facing a situation which is totally unusual. These are the type of events which have occurred over the past few decades in this country. So we should live with it. Second, we are much better prepared than what we were earlier. We have enough food stocks, and also we have got in Mandarega a organization and mechanism where we can give employment to people without setting up new organizations, new procedures, etc. These things are really factors which will help us to tide over this calamity. As far as the inflation is concerned, I think it will much depend on how and in what manner we release our food stocks. We have enough food stocks, and if we handle the release part in an efficient way, there is no reason why we will have the situation where food prices are going out of hand. But the problem is not only of food. There are other problems which are more important. Problem of fodder, for example, for the cattle. The problem of drinking water. These are the issues on which we have not given sufficient attention. As far as the general impact is concerned, I believe if we are able to contain food grain prices by release of timely and efficient manner the food, then the danger will be much more subdued. It is not that we are for some very big spike in the food grain prices. The other, though, a debilitating factor is that the international prices are also rising, and therefore that option is not available. Fortunately, we do not need to exercise that option. We have enough. What we need to do is to release food grains in an orderly manner, see that it reaches the people, which many a time does not happen. Now, if we can take care of it, and as the food minister, the agriculture minister said, the state have a much bigger role in all this. Center can provide resources, center can give support and help in a whole variety of ways, but the implementation part is basically with the states, and we will have to sit together and prepare a joint strategy that the state also play their part and food reaches people. If it does, then I believe the impact of drought will be a lot more, it won't be that serious as otherwise it would have been.
Mr. Madan Sabnavis, do you also continue to be equally optimistic of India's ability to handle a drought-like situation, given the fact that this year, particularly as some of our other panelists are pointing out, we seem to have excess food grain production, and that's something that will clearly come to the rescue in a situation like this. So what's the kind of growth number that you're really looking at, given the fact that we have that excess food grain, we have the ability to deal with a drought? So in that sense, the overall impact perhaps will not be as adverse as it would have been in another year.
No, actually, I don't think I would agree with those arguments, because I feel that even though agriculture has a share of around, say, 15% in our GDP, today at a time when we are grappling with an overall GDP growth of 6.5%, that is what the RBI said, or something even below that, I think even in case we want to shave off, say, 0.5% growth, it's going to be a big number for us. So I don't think there's any comfort in the fact of saying that our GDP has been immune to agricultural performance. That's point number one. Point number two, I think we should not get carried away by this thought that we have surplus food grains in our granaries, because we should remember that we're only talking of rice and wheat, where there is official procurement taking place, and we are more vulnerable when it comes to pulses and edible oils, and that's where I see a problem this year, that the pulses crop may not be as good as what it was last year. And given the fact that we import 15 to 20% of our requirements, there's going to be definitely a lot of inflationary pressure out there, notwithstanding the fact that we have large stocks of rice and wheat with us. The same thing holds for edible oils, where we import around 50 to 55% of our edible oil requirements. So just think of a situation where the groundnut crop is not expected to be good this year. We don't expect the tur and the moong crops to be good this year. There's going to be a pressure on imports. There's going to be a pressure on our balance of payments. So there are lots of other problems which are coming in on account of this monsoon failure. So on the whole, I don't think I would be too sanguine about this entire situation. And let's not really fall into this comfort zone of saying that we have lots of food grains with us. Look, that's only rice and wheat. And even our reaction time to crisis has not really been very fast in the past. So unless we really do take decisions on imports or in terms of release of food grains, I think there will be problems for us going ahead.
Actually, before I go to the other panelists, let me get both Dr. K Alagh and Professor Vyas to actually respond to what Mr. Madan Sabnavis has said out there. Dr. Alagh, to you first. The fact that he's clearly saying that alarm bells are ringing and the government hasn't reacted as quickly and swiftly as it should have, and the fact that excess food grain production is clearly by no means a solace coming in a situation where we're already seeing a sharp slowdown coming in.
But Dr. Sabnavis is quite right in saying that the food prices that have been under pressure even earlier are basically pulses, edible oils, and milk products and fruits and vegetables. And clearly pulses, edible oils, and milk products are going to be under pressure. But it is very, very incorrect to argue that the fact that you have 64 million tons of grain lying with you has no anti-inflationary impact. After all, grain is still a very important part of your food budget. And if you didn't have the grain, you'd be much worse off. So, and also please remember that releasing grain has a deflationary effect in macro terms because it sucks purchasing power out of the system. So to underplay grain, while I quite agree with him that it is some of the other non-grain items which will be under pressure, and that will, as I said, create inflationary pressure. The fact that it's not, listen, the growth rate of the Indian economy now depends on the non-agricultural sector. This has been shown in drought after drought. I mean, the time is gone when if you had a drought, a bad monsoon, your GDP would be between 3% and minus 2%. I mean, during the last 30 years, we have had hardly any year in which the growth rate has been low. It depends a lot more on what Mr. Chidambaram and what Dr. Manmohan Singh are planning to do on reviving industrial investment. Yes, it does have a marginal effect on the growth, but this is a matter of numbers. It cannot be a matter of speculation of this, that, or the other. So while I agree with him on the non-grain food items spiking inflation. I wouldn't run down the fact that food stocks properly handled, and mind you, it's not, I mean, while I quite agree with Professor Vyas, I'd be much happier if the grain reaches poor families, but even if it is released in the market, it has a deflationary effect. That's just sheer macroeconomics. It's an identity. It's not even a debatable kind of question. It's a no-brainer to raise that as a question.
Professor Vyas, a quick word from you before I go to the other panelists, because we've got an interesting debate here where you've got clearly Dr. K Alagh saying that as an economy we are much less dependent on the monsoon. Now we're not as monsoon dependent an economy now as we were perhaps several years ago, but Dr. Sabnavis is there clearly pointing out that if we do not pay attention to that deficient monsoon, we're clearly in for trouble.
Well, certainly we have to pay sufficient attention to the...
I didn't say that you should not pay attention. Huh?
But with this...
Sure, I got your point, sir. I got your point.
But it is not something which... But it's not something which is unusual for us. Every 2, 3, 4 years, we have this sort of situation, and measures which we take is generally now, one can call them as a drill. We know how to start the famine relief program, how to distribute food, whom to enroll, how to disburse money, and so on. Only thing is that we have to do it more efficiently than what the record has suggested so far. As far as the general impact is concerned, it is true that if there is a shortage of other than the food grain items, there will be an impact on the prices. But then see the weights of these various things in the total consumer's budget, especially the budget of the poor people. If poor people's budget can be protected by releasing food grain, and to say that it is only wheat and rice, I believe we should realize that over a period of time, our people have got accustomed to eat wheat and rice, maybe because of the ration, because PDS was distributing only wheat and rice. The very fact that the coarse grain are declining, even in good years in terms of production and area, suggests that people are now switching over to wheat and rice in a major way, in a big way. Therefore, if we can handle it, then I believe we are not in that desperate a situation as many people are telling us we would be.
Let me go across to Mr. Surinder Sud and get his perspective, because Mr. Sud, clearly we know that while the dependency may have gone down, and the fact that we have surplus food grain is definitely a very, very big relief coming in this year particularly. But how are you really viewing 2012 and the drought or the drought-like situation compared to some of the previous years and India's ability to really deal with the situation?
Well, I really think that we are much overrating the current drought. You see, if we look at the area that has been affected, that will give a much better maximum deficiency of rainfall is in northwest India, that is Punjab, Haryana, western UP, and eastern Rajasthan, and those areas. And these are the areas where irrigation facilities are very well developed. And we have seen even the areas planted have been normal. But yes, having said that, let me add that the crop growth there is bound to be adversely affected. That is number one, and that will lead to some shortfall, maybe 5 to 10% shortfall in yields. And secondly, it will add to the farmer's cost. So we have to take into account how to relieve that farmer's additional cost, and 50% subsidy on diesel has been announced by the government, but I hope it does not take weeks and months before they can really finalize the arrangement. How will they distinguish between the diesel going to the farmers and going to the other non-farmer users of diesel? Now that is one part of it. The other is the maximum deficit of rainfall is in Karnataka, Gujarat, and western Rajasthan. Now western Rajasthan, as we know, is a very, very arid part. Much of it is desert. And its contribution to overall macro growth in agriculture production is very limited. Of course, this is an important area where some coarse grains, particularly bajra, and some pulses, moat in particular, are grown. Gujarat is also affected, but there are hopeful signs that it might rain, and some of it might be salvaged. So this, if we consider this thing, so that means the overall impact on agricultural production, of course, it will be down, but overall agricultural production or overall agricultural growth rate also may not go negative this year. As we have seen in 2009 also, which was fairly bad year from rainfall perspective, and rainfall was also ill distributed that year also. But the overall agricultural growth was still in the positive domain, though it was less than 1. It was 0.4% or 0.7%, something like that. And the third point that I will raise is that if we see the successive droughts that we have seen in recent years, 1987 drought is distant apart. Let us see the 2002 drought, and then 2009 drought, and even 2004 was meteorologically not a good rainfall year. So we have seen that in each successive drought year, the production as well as the growth rates have been much higher. So when we are ultimately assessing the drought damage, if we compare whatever the performance comes out ultimately this year, and that will depend also on rainfall in August as well as in September, and also subsequently in the Rabi, that's a major concern, because if the September rainfall is low, that may adversely affect the Rabi sowing as well. But whatever is the outcome ultimately of this year's drought, I believe it will be far better than 2009. And it will be unfair to compare it with last year's production.
Prepared.
And
right,
it
will not perhaps.
It will.
Sure, go ahead.
It will be unfair to compare.
Move on to the others.
Yes. It will be unfair to compare it with last year. Last year was exceptional year when suddenly the food grain production jumped from 2,244 million tons to 257 million tons. But I'm sure this year's food grain production, despite drought, will not be less than 2010-11 food grain production of 244 million tons. So that's a positive factor. Thank you.
All right, Manas, Ranjan, we've been talking about whether we are underestimating or overestimating the impact of the drought. But if I could get a sense from you of the kind of impact that we're going to really see on the ground, because it's all very well to be sitting here and talking about it, but the real impact that is being felt on the ground is obviously of very serious nature.
I think I would agree totally with Dr. Alagh that the real question is not how it will impact the growth rate. It will probably shape the growth rate by 0.5 percentage point. I think that's something that I would agree, because the initial expectations that were that there will be a growth of 3% in agricultural GDP, and now it could be 0%, it could be less than 1% definitely. So that given, the bigger concern is how it's going to impact the growth of other things, like the growth of children of this country.
Right.
And what we have seen is that over the last 7-8 years, very clearly the indicators around the health of children, around the weight of children, around the body mass index of women, all these indicators seem to be either worsening or staying stagnant. And this is something which is going to be badly impacted. So that's one thing is very clear. So it's apparent that the only way to tackle this is to release more food grains. But whether you release food grains to the market or you release food grains to the PDS, it makes a big difference.
Right.
If already the government has been doing open market sale, and much of this open market sale is actually getting exported. This is something which was in a very recent interview of the food minister. He said that he is not worried about production, and that and the same point he was trying to make is that he is not worried about production of food grains. But already FAO has cut down food grain, at least rice production estimate has been cut down by 6%. So, and we are still exporting.
Right.
At a time when we are thinking whether we should be able to import or not, we are actually continuing to export, and all this food grain that is being sold in the open market is being exported. The only way is to spend more on MGNREGA and also put more grain into the PDS, because if you put grain into the PDS, it goes to the people. If you put grain into the open market, it goes into speculation. Something that I was just looking at is that between April and July, the price of most of the food grains has gone up. In fact, the price of rice, I was looking at the price of rice in Kolkata and Hyderabad, some of the places which are rice eating places, it's going up by almost 14-20% in just 3 months. And this is not because of any reduction in supply. It's essentially speculation, because people know that there is not going to be good production. Already traders are increasing prices. So
the speculative forces clearly in the market are already at play, and that's impacting. Let me get a quick word actually from Mahesh, Palawat, as to whether we're going to see the rains play catch up. How bad is the situation right now? Are we actually really looking at a drought, and can we see the deficiency reducing over the next few weeks?
You're right that we are actually looking at the drought-like condition, and 5 geographical division in country is facing drought.
Right.
And 14 geographical divisions are deficient. Only 17
Where
is
is
normal.
The situation the worst right now?
Only the West Rajasthan, it is more than 70% deficient.
Right.
Saurashtra and Kutch, 81%
deficient. Right.
Delhi, Haryana, Chandigarh, these areas 71%, Punjab 68%, and Gujarat 60%. These are 5 geographical divisions which are very much affected, worst affected states. We can say that pure drought conditions are prevailing there. And 14 other geographical divisions, they are facing deficient rainfall, that is between up to 60%, from 20 to 60%. Only 17 geographical divisions, they are only normal
monsoon.
That in normal definition is from +19 to -19%. So we cannot say if it is -19%, then also it is deficient rain.
All right, talking about some of the worst affected areas because of the deficient monsoon, NDTV traveled to one such area, a village in Maharashtra, Satara district, that scores of people are being forced to leave as there's not even enough drinking water. Let's take a look.
Desperate and thirsty, villagers in drought-hit Satara district in Maharashtra grappling for water from the only source that has some left.
We are at Karkhil village in Satara, and what we see are deserted roads and locked homes. No rains means no water, and many villagers have left the village.
4 months ago, there were over 1,200 residents. Today, only 750 are around.
सब बाहर गांव में गए मोल मजूरी करने के लिए.
Last year too, the rains played truant. Agriculture, the main source of livelihood, was badly hit. Those still here are hoping the monsoon will revive. The options otherwise, not too many.
पानी की वजह से बहुत लोग गांव छोड़ के चले गए. अभी पानी बरसात नहीं आएगा तो हम भी जाएगा.
इधर पानी की बहुत टेंशन चल रही है. पानी नहीं है ज़्यादा और आगे कुछ करेंगे ऐसा इधर कुछ है नहीं, इसलिए हम गांव छोड़ के चले गए.
The irony, the situation just 8 kilometers away, starkly happier. A lake made during the British Raj in 1872, still in use, making the big difference.
सातारा जिला में किधर भी पानी नहीं है. राजेवाड़ी तालाब में पानी मिलता है. उधर से हम पानी उठा के लेके जाते.
हे ज्या बोलून काहीच पाणी नाही ना आता. असं आहे. यात पाणी आलं तर शेतीला पाणी, नाहीतर शेतीला पाणीच नाही.
Long-term measures to mitigate water shortage promised by the Maharashtra government that it could now well implement. With Hetal Gangar in Satara district of Maharashtra, Saurabh Gupta, NDTV.
We're going to slip into a quick break at this point, but on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the further effects of the monsoon, as we just saw in that story that played out, drinking water becoming a huge problem, also the kind of impact it will have on the macroeconomic indicators, and whether we're going to see the situation improving at all over the next few weeks. That's coming up after a break.
Further pressure on food inflation, because of the deficient and uneven monsoon, thus potentially aggravating inflation and inflation expectations.
The monsoon is going to be bad and they don't take decisions immediately. This year is a washout. If this year is a washout, next year again is not going to be good because you can't recover. Then we can kiss the next term for UPA goodbye.
Welcome back here with We Mean Business, and we've been discussing the impact of the deficient monsoon. Remember, several districts in western Rajasthan have already been declared drought hit, with the crucial sowing season having gone by without a single spell of rain and almost certain crop failure in the arid districts of Bikaner, Barmer, Jodhpur, Jaisalmer. But in far off United States, the effects of the monsoon in these remote districts of Rajasthan is also being very critically watched. Here's why.
Barren, uncultivated land, now a common sight in western Rajasthan. Bohra Ram and his four brothers have over 100 bighas of land, but with not a single spell of rain, Bohra Ram has not bothered to invest in seeds for sowing. Apart from coarse grains, Bohra Ram would have sown half his fields with guar, but not this year.
वो भी हमारी चिंता पूरी है।
हाँ।
और चेहरे पे ये हमारे देख लो आप।
यही चिंता है कि अगर बरसात नहीं होगी तो गुआर कैसे होएगा?
गुआर कैसे हुआ? तो हमारे किसान चारे भी नहीं हमारे पास पशुओं के लिए, पानी नहीं है पीने के लिए।
For this arid region of western Rajasthan, guar has been a popular crop because it grows even in scanty rainfall. 1 or 2 rains are enough to grow guar, and traditionally it was used as animal fodder. But guar also produces a powder used in oil drilling and food processing. At this grain market in Jodhpur, with guar in short supply, prices are likely to skyrocket. And it's not surprising that industry experts in far-off USA are keenly watching the rain deficit in western Rajasthan.
So the American market is worried?
Extremely worried. And there's volatility right now. There had been a calming in the price situation because of the monsoon uncertainty. And the last time I checked, it wasn't a very good monsoon. Volatility has increased again, and prices have increased by 25–30% in the last 2–3 weeks alone.
At Lotus Gums, SK Sharma is worried. He's been in the business for 35 years. Recently, he set up a new plant to produce guar gum for the oil fracking industry in Texas. It's an investment, he says, that's unlikely to recover.
This is totally a crop is based on rain-fed area. तो rain-fed होगा नहीं तो गुआर पैदा नहीं होगा. यदि ये अच्छा हो गया, बहुत अच्छी बात है. नहीं होगा तो scenario will be more difficult for us. We cannot run industry.
But while guar may be critical for the high-profile oil drilling business, here in Rajasthan it's essential fodder for animals, and an almost certain drought means a battle for survival. With Sarah Jacob in the United States, in Jodhpur, Harsha Kumari Singh, NDTV.
Dr. Madan Sabnavis, it's now almost certain that the government will have to press into action certain measures to ease out the situation and the impact that we're seeing because of the deficient monsoon. But what we're seeing here is a peculiar situation. On one hand, you've got the finance minister promising that he's going to move forward on the path of fiscal consolidation. On the other hand, some of those drought relief measures are bound to clearly impact the fiscal situation adversely going further. How badly will we see this really impact both the fiscal and the current account deficits?
I think in the current situation, we should be very clear of the fact that the highest priority is to make sure that the farmers who have been affected by the drought are given relief by the government. So I think the NREGA program will have a very important role to play. And even the fact, notwithstanding the fact that there's been a lot of criticism about the nature of the NREGA program, but the fact remains that that's the only way in which we're able to deliver employment and income for the farmers. And I think this is going to play a very critical role. And I won't be surprised in case the amount of money deployed for NREGA is even higher than what was budgeted. But I think the other two issues on the fiscal consolidation side will mean about what the government plans to do regarding the loans given to the farmers. But I think loan waivers and interest rate subventions have been a part of the drought relief package. And I think these are some things which are going to weigh heavily on the mind of the finance minister. And I should think that even though there could be a slippage in the fiscal deficit on account of the drought relief measures, it would probably be very much worth it. On the current account deficit, I think there will be a greater amount of imports of pulses and edible oils, which though may not mean very big numbers in quantitative terms, but given the fact that our exports are not going to be as buoyant as they were in the last 2 years, I think the current account deficit would be pressurized to a certain extent. And to that extent, I think even the rupee would be under pressure. So on the whole, I think the macroeconomic picture doesn't look too comfortable or too rosy against this background of the drought. So it's not just about the GDP in agriculture coming down. The demand for industrial products, which normally picks up during the harvest time when farmers spend the money on industrial goods, is going to get affected. Inflation is going to be higher. Fiscal prudence is going to be called into question again, but I think we need to be sure that a higher fiscal deficit is something which we should tolerate to make sure that the people are not really affected, and of course pressure on the current account deficit.
Dr. Alagh, perhaps that's the reason why we should be more worried about the deficient monsoon or the drought than we were in other years, because clearly there is absolutely no room available right now to actually come up with some of those drought relief measures, a loan waiver for farmers, for instance. Now, those are measures that obviously come with a cost attached to it. And this is a time when the government is clearly seriously looking at bringing its fiscal house in order. There are credit rating agencies who are issuing warnings after warnings that if you do not move in that direction, you're looking at a possible downgrade. So in that sense, don't you feel, Dr. Alagh, that we have a very peculiar situation where if the situation right now worsens, we're clearly in for trouble? Also, a quick word from you as to whether the government is doing enough to provide that much needed support to farmers and what needs to be done here on.
Let me be very clear. I'm not at all underplaying the welfare and other effects and also the inflationary effects outside the grain sector. Having said that, I think the point which Dr. Sabnavis made, that in terms of magnitudes, if the government does something like raising the fuel price or reducing some other subsidy, that has a much greater impact than some of these measures. Now, that doesn't mean that an anti-drought policy, in spite of the deflationary effect of releasing grains, is not going to strain the economy. It is going to strain the economy. But we are all working on the assumption that policy is not there at all. Now, I think it is possible to withdraw purchasing power through other methods and to do some of these essential things. And let's be very clear that the drinking water effect, the employment effects, affects very large numbers of people. So I'm not at all underplaying that aspect. But we are talking about macroeconomics. I still believe that the bigger macroeconomic issues lie elsewhere. I mean, we were in a macroeconomic, I use the term crisis, that if you can grow at 8% and you start growing at 6% and less, to me, that is a crisis. That had happened before the drought. Now, the bigger issues are cutting down inessential subsidies.
Isn't the drought worsening that crisis?
Well, if you don't do anything, it will worsen. It is, but the point is policy has free play. That is the point we should be making. We are going on an assumption that policy has no role to play. Yes, of course, you will be much worse off. But the point is, you can withdraw purchasing power elsewhere. You can put it in investment and you can put it, as Dr. Sabnavis said, quantitatively, the impact of some of these things is not as large as we are making it out to be. At the margin, if you don't do anything else, it will affect. But I think to make the point that policy will not be able to handle these issues, in my mind, is exaggerated.
Dr. Sabnavis, a quick reaction to that.
No, I would tend to agree that we should not rule out the fact that policy will not be operative. I'm sure the government is also very much aware of what the problems are and will be taking remedial actions. But the only fact which I wouldn't rule out is that the conditions are definitely not going to be good this time. And it's going to be problems on all ends, all economic frontiers, and we should be prepared for it.
All right, Dr. Vyas, we're faced with a situation when you've clearly got the government looking at taking some tough decisions to bring its fiscal house in order, perhaps raising diesel prices, for instance, is something that was being talked about for a very, very long time. But when you're faced with a situation like this, when you're already talking about a drought, when you're talking about a further inflationary impact because of that drought, don't you think it will tie down the hands of the government even further to take some of those tough decisions now?
Well, it does, certainly, because you have to spend money in order to provide employment. You have to import maybe more of pulses, more of oil seeds, edible oil, and so on. But I would suggest that let us look into the performance of the non-agriculture sector, and if they can be improved upon, and not necessarily that they are hampered because of the drought. If your electricity generation is not coming up to the mark, if the industrial production is stagnating, it is not because of the drought. There are supply side constraints, and we should look into it. Drought will affect, of course, one of the major industries in this country, namely agriculture. But as far as the other sectors of the economy are concerned, the fault lies somewhere else, and we have to look into those issues a lot more carefully. As far as agriculture is concerned, our concern today must be the welfare of the farmers, people who are affected by drought in terms of their production, in terms of supply of drinking water, in terms of supply of fodder for their cattle, and also something which is not generally recognized is the amount of drudgery which it involves for the women particularly, who have to do the domestic work, go for work, collect fuel, and all this while keeping the hearth warm. We are concerned more as when it comes to the drought related effects, more on the welfare part, on the part how we can save the situation. Impact part is certainly there, but that is marginal. Much more impact and much more drastic impact is being felt in the economy because of the other sectors and their performance, and the policies which are really obstructing their growth or coming in the way of smoothing the processes in these areas. Let us look into those more carefully and do not take drought as an alibi for saying that what can be done if there is a drought in the country. Drought we have been accustomed to for all these centuries. We will be able to handle it. There will be difficulties, but we have to face it. And we have also to see that the allocations for the welfare of people are not in any way curtailed, but look into the other aspect of the economy where there are big problems.
Mr. Surinder Sud, in that sense, let me try and get a word from you as to what the government needs to do almost immediately to at least salvage the situation here on, and also the interesting debate that always comes up in a situation like this. We have surplus food grain production, we do not have enough storage for it. The export issue, as Manas was here pointing out, saying that perhaps why are you even looking at exporting food grains at a time when there is a need and we are facing a drought-like situation. So a quick reaction to the government's response here on.
Well, immediately, of course, what you need to do is to salvage your crops, and that can be done through properly implementing the contingency crop plan. I mean, these areas which are really deficient and where there's not enough moisture for crop sowing so far, whenever the water falls, you should at least have some short duration crop. But I would of course suggest that better still is if you can, if we can produce fodder in those areas, because let us face the fact that the worst effect of a drought, and the more from the farmers and from the people's distress point of view, the most worrisome aspect comes in the following summer, when whatever little sources of water are there, they also dry up, fodder vanishes totally, and people start leaving their livestock or selling them or sending them to the slaughterhouses. So if we can make sure that some fodder is grown now for use in the subsequent period, and secondly also we should try to conserve whatever water can be conserved. I know water is already short, but still, instead of having a drought code, we should actually have a good weather code, so that we can have we can conserve enough water to mitigate the impact of drought over a longer period as well. But even today, I think we should see to it that not a drop of water is wasted. And the slogan for that, many people raise the slogan, कि खेत का पानी खेत में और गांव का पानी गांव में. You should not let even a drop of water go waste. That is on the immediate what is needed.
Right, Manas, your response really to what Surinder ji is saying here on the fact that the government needs to also press into action more long-term strategies to deal with the drought. Now, we've seen successive droughts, and as Dr. Vyas was saying, we know how to deal with them, but we need to get better and better at it, right?
I think the last statement that was made about khet ka pani khet mein, gaon ka pani gaon mein, I think therein lies the solution. And then if we look at the last at least 2 plans, very clearly what the government is concentrating on, it's trying to build more large scale irrigation structures, which are not actually irrigation structures. They are big dams essentially to provide water to industries, and minor irrigation structures have actually been reduced. But what you saw in that clip from Maharashtra, it's a small irrigation structure which was created during British times, which is still helping out people. I think the government has to change its irrigation strategy from this large dam-based irrigation strategy to smaller surface water-based, and maybe in conjunction with groundwater-based with recharge of groundwater. I think that's one. But the second thing I want to say here is that if we look at NREGA, the MGNREGA program, I was just trying to compare that how much MGNREGA was provided in 2010-11 and how much has been provided in 2012-13 in the period April to July. And this has reduced by 36%. If you compare 2010-11 and 2012-13, it has come down by 36%.
All right, now let me, before I wrap up the show, get a quick word from Mahesh on the best case and the worst case scenario that we can see with regard to the monsoon here on.
Best case can be the monsoon deficit, which is now 17% at 70%. If we take country as a whole, then it can be 14% or 13%.
14 to 13%.
14 to 13%. But the prediction of the long range models are still that it is not going to recover. Only central India will get sufficient rain, but west and northwest India will continue to be facing drought-like condition. So we for August and September, because El Nino, which was evolving, now it is going to be positive. So in the fag end of the monsoon, rainfall will be much more less than we have seen till now. So in central India, suppose that is Vidarbha, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, Chhattisgarh and Telangana. These areas will be getting good amount of rainfall, but Haryana, Punjab, West Rajasthan, Gujarat, Saurashtra, Kutch, they will be continuing to getting dry spell. So there is no chance that we can recover more than 2 to 3%.
So it is a drought here.
Yeah, drought.
All right, so clearly a cloud of worries out there for India's policy makers here on. We'll have to see how they really deal with the situation, even as we've seen interesting views coming from our panelists on how badly will the drought impact India this year. And as everyone's been pointing out, that the impact clearly on the ground will be felt much worse than what we're going to see in that actual growth number that we always seem to focus on. Thank you all for joining us. But before we wrap up the show, we leave you with a special report on how Karnataka incurred an expenditure of over 17 crore rupees for special prayers for the rain gods that was conducted across thousands of temples in Karnataka. Take a look.
The Karnataka government's contingency plan to tackle drought. Leave the matter to God. 34,000 temples across Karnataka perform special prayers for rain, spending more than 5,000 rupees each as ordered by the BJP-run government in the state. The irony, the expenditure ran into few more thousands since flowers and fruits are as expensive as ever due to a weak monsoon. Besides, the special pujas needed items like rice, ghee, dry fruits, coconuts, milk in huge quantities and flowers unlimited. 123 out of 176 taluks in Karnataka have been declared as drought affected by the state government due to a 23% rain deficiency so far. The hope is that August and September are not as bad as June and July, where farmers saw crop failure and poor production. At a time when the state is seeking 2,000 crore rupees as relief fund for drought from the centre, it has gone ahead with its decision to allow an expenditure of 17 crore rupees for special pujas.
For praying for well of our state of Karnataka, for regarding the farmers and also for getting good rain.
Experts say the money could have been used towards possible scientific solutions like cloud seeding, as tried and succeeded in 2003. NDTV over the past several days has been travelling to villages and districts affected by drought in Karnataka. We saw on the ground farmers desperate to sell away cattle because they are unable to maintain them due to lack of fodder. Many others in districts like Chitradurga and Raichur are even migrating to Andhra Pradesh to work as labour for some fortunate farmers who may be seeing harvest at this time when it is the peak of monsoon. These 17 crore rupees, desperate farmers say, could perhaps be used to compensate them at a time they are seeing poor production and crop failure across thousands of hectares in the state. A reason for hope or a coincidence after the prayers? The good news is that the Met Department has predicted more rains in the driest parts of north and southern Karnataka in the coming week. In Bangalore, Radhika Iyer, NDTV.